Great. Jennifer Stewart Miller is the author of Thief, winner of the 2020 Grayson Books Poetry Prize. A Fox Appears, a biography of a boy in haiku from 2015, and a chapbook, The Stranger's Burial Ground from Seven Kitchens Press. Her poems have appeared lately in the Florida Review Online, Cutleaf, The Night Heron Barks, RHINO, Tar River Poetry, and Verse Daily, among others. She recently co-edited with poets Elaine Sexton and Joan Cappello a collection of poetry written during the pandemic. She holds an MFA from Bennington College and a JD from Columbia University. And she's one of our beloved board members at the Hudson Valley Writers Center. So please, all of you, help me welcome Jennifer Stewart Miller.
Thank you, Jennifer, for that introduction. I'm honored to be reading at Hudson Valley Writers Center tonight, one of my favorite writing centers. And I'm especially delighted to be reading alongside Jennifer and Silvina, whose work I deeply admire. I'm going to read a few poems from my new collection, Thief, and then I will close with a couple poems from my chapbook, The Stranger's Burial Ground, and if there's time, maybe one or two new poems. There we go, keep track. My dead. My dead aren't good on their feet. My dead slip from ladders, tumble down stairs, reach for handles and miss. Maybe they're house painters or old sea captains. Maybe a la Ahab, they lack a leg. I thought I could make it, my father said. The search for more time, the white whale finding us instead, the surprise, an untied lace, a protruding thought on a stair's tread. Have you tried lifting a dead person off the floor? Go ahead, wrap a dead arm around your neck. Maybe your dead are kinder, but mine, they won't look you in the eye, won't say sorry or bare their hearts. They won't even admit how heavy they are. Silver Sides. Driving to pick the kids up at school, I try to recall the name of this minnow. My sister would know it. She's the one with the net for details, quicksilver flashes in the shallows, the state capitals and birds in car games we played on long drives. As for me, spare me the details. Let the minnows go. She calls me on the phone again, says she tries to sleep, but only dozes, jerks awake all night. It's the voodoo, she says, the pins sticking in all over her. She says she found the doll the nurses made, and they stole the keys to her car, dumped in all this filth, fish heads and stinking soil. Her car is crawling. Vines jungling. She dozes, she wakes. They squeeze their way around her neck. I want instead to remember summers when she and I were small, long days on the town beach, the drone of boat engines, how we would scoop up salt water in our blue and yellow pails, slosh it up the sand, and watch the minnows flop about, flash their little lightning. Then we plopped them into a big bucket and left them to swim around for the afternoon. Did we let them go in time? Here they are, swimming up in my throat. Treatment. Straight from the locked hospital, I drive her. First, she must check in at the office. How jovial she is, as if I'm dropping her off for college, except she's too old. I can't come in and she's not bringing a popcorn popper or much besides 5 packs of Marlboros and a $1,200 prescription she can't pay for. We joke about it now, how when she was born, I took one look at her and whacked her on the head with my bottle. Welcome home, little sister. What a blow, siblings for life. For her birthday, I drive back across the bay to the rehab house. We sit in the locked garden and go through the motions of sisterhood and celebration, making small talk, nibbling bites of how merciless the self is, bittersweet chocolate cake. March. First light. From far across the foggy, half-frozen lake, the sound of geese. All night, their distant gathering cries soothe me back to sleep. Something under the ice. Around the lake, Norway spruce, blue spruce, white pine. I wish my father could hear the geese, but he is miles away. More and more he sleeps, dozes in his chair, naps long hours, body sprawled across his bed. Flesh has melted off him like ice off the lake. Every embrace is down to the bone. Along the shore, a yacht club without any yachts. Snow drifted up against the doors as in a childhood storm. When he was a kid, my father found a Colt pistol hidden in the ruins of a barn. Old enough to have been used in the Civil War, though he was too young to think of that. Swathed in fog, the geese, their distant gathering cries. Last night, I cracked the storm window open. Now I open it wide. A stream or a spring burbles away unseen. My father still frets about that gun, what it might have been worth, how he used it to crack some nuts. I think of how he holstered it and has carried it all his life, the possibilities, how things might have been different. In a patch of open water, one goose swims round and round. Safekeeping. In 2012, in Timbuktu, under the burning eyes of barbarians, the guardians of books carefully wrapped the ancient manuscripts in sackcloth and smuggled them out in canoes, cars, donkey carts. They hid them in bunkers and won't be back to fetch them anytime soon. A Girl, too, is a book written in an ancient language of primeval letters that tell a version of her mother's history and her father's and the living worlds. Please, my sister says, please. From the halfway house, she calls and calls. The child is hiding in the bushes from her father's friends. Of all good things Jay loves on this earth, her daughter comes first. But now she pleads, wants to send her 3,000 miles to me. Arrival. At JFK Airport, I glimpse long blonde hair. My niece walks by, and I call her name. I've made room for her, cleaned out my daughter's dresser and closet, emptied the desk, found her a chair. A blue hyacinth perfumes the chilly room. I hang a sleeveless dress in the closet as she arranges photos of her dog and her mom by the bed. How long will I be filling in, playing mother, Second violin. Am I only clay in consequence's hand, or am I the potter? 13. How shaped she is already. A girl thrown on what wheel? Too late for more than love's glaze, I fear. How to fletch your own arrow. Steal the sunbird's plumage and sheen, how the sun anatomizes emerald green. Appropriate iridescence and gleam. Add a slice of metallic blue from the throat. Steal a few verbs. Forage, flit, hover, probe. Savor their fruit. Think decurved beak. Think of the nectar it swallows and sings. Your appendages, these are not arms but wings. Pluck 3 flight feathers and lay their quills along the shaft. At top and bottom, wrap them fast with a bit of sinew, then glue each quill down. Trim them with scissors, tight and sweet. Now you are fletched, now you are arrow. Last poem from this group. Thief. Only an animal with hands could have stolen the dish of jelly I set out for the Orioles last night. I picture that lone ranger-faced raccoon up on its haunches in the garden, lifting the orange-tinted glass bowl to the August moon as it gulps down sure-fine Concord grape. I forgive the thief. Who hasn't been tempted by dark to steal something sweet? But at the edge of the road, like a clump of hairy jelly, lies a raccoon, stiff hands clutching at nothing. Sure, maybe every delicious moment ends like this. But fuck you anyway, truck or car, or whatever you are. Tonight I'll raise a glass to what moon there is and lick up every last tongueful of grief. Not because I'm a hero, because I'm a born thief. All right, the next 2 poems I'm going to read are from The Stranger's Burial Ground. The poems in this chapbook are based on 17th to 19th century gravestone inscriptions, birth and death records, historical documents, and such, all relating to Cape Cod, Massachusetts, where some of my ancestors are buried. This is part of a longer project that I hope to complete this year. The 2 poems I'm going to read are in the voices of women. They're not all persona poems in here, but I'm going to read the 2 persona poems. The first is based on an actual entry in the death records from Chatham, Massachusetts. The second was inspired by a gravestone in Dennis, Massachusetts. Tabitha Hinckley, burnt to death, pauper. My life, page 11A, deaths in 1839. Cold, that town clerk and the book he keeps. No words. Where is the book that says my eyes were the blue of chicory flowers? My mother used to tell me that. Where is the book that says she read me the Bible, taught me to cook, to sew a straight seam? Is there a book that says I loved pear blossoms, petals flurrying in a salt breeze, the smell of steam off beach plum jam simmering? A book that says I loved gathering bayberries by the marsh? Mother died, then father. I was unlucky, almost a husband, but the Lord said no. He was lost at sea, another dream. I never took to any of the others, and they did not take to me. Never a place, my sister's husbands not kind, my tongue sharp, and me with skin that itched just awful. One misfortune after the other, off to the poorhouse. Where is the book that says what a bitter cold day it was, that says I leaned over the fire and my apron caught? God have mercy, God have mercy. Do you hear me? The burn and char, reek of hair, of flesh, until no skin. My linen stuck to me. They put the flames out my body, throbbing, throbbing, death's own heart. Is there a book that contains my screaming? Patience. The beginning here is the actual inscription on the gravestone. Batha, daughter to Samuel and Patience Hall, aged 6 weeks, died February 1698. No hellish winged skull on your stone, Bathsheba, my first, my only. God was in a hurry to take you back, they said. How could he not regret his gift? If God was in a hurry, if this is God, the dark lashings of your sealed up eyes, the cruel exactitude of your tiny fingernails, I take no comfort. From our little Nubscusset, your father sent all the way to Newport for it, this sturdy greenish slate, 2 perfect doves plucking perfect cherries from an urn. It took a long time. It came by ship. All those months, like pine logs crackling in flames, I had my thoughts. You came early and at the worst time, such a cold December, frail as a new hatched robin. I slept with you under my wing. I kept you warm. 6 weeks. It took a long time. The chisel cut deep. How peaceful it is here. A summer breeze, creak of red cedars. But your root and suck, oh, you were fierce. All right, I'm going to read one more poem. This is brand new. I'm still editing it. It was inspired by my experience of emptying a house this past spring. What I've been eating. What I've been eating is photographs. What I've been eating is the stuff of addicts, is years and years. What I've been eating is my newborn babies. What I've been eating is afterbirth, is the wedding of my sister and her dead ex-husband, is old hairdos, short, long, bangs, layers, is a beauty I didn't know. What I've been eating is what burns, is workbooks, report cards, test scores, artwork, is Mother's Day cards, is my mother younger than I am now. What I've been eating is stories. What I've been eating is what it cost, is heartfelt letters from half-forgotten friends, is the sweetness of their resurrected names on my tongue, is birthday parties and birthday cakes, is still lit candles. What I've been eating is old love letters, is I'm sorry, is I love you. What I've been eating blackens my fingers. What I've been eating fills me up, empties me, makes me hungry. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. That was really wonderful. I loved hearing those poems, especially that new one at the end. So Great. Now we are going to hear Silvina López Medin. She was born in Buenos Aires and lives in New York. She has 5 collections of poetry, including Excursion, which was selected by Mary Jo Bang as the winner of the 2019 Oversound Chapbook Prize. Her hybrid poetry book, Poem That Never Ends, was the winner of the 2019 Essay Press Contest and was just published this year. She also has a play, and she co-translated Anne Carson's Eros the Bittersweet in 2015 and Home Movies by Robert Hass into Spanish. Her poems and other pieces have appeared in Plowshares, Brooklyn Rail, and MoMA Post, among others. She translates art articles from MoMA. She holds an MFA in creative writing from NYU. She's an editor at Ugly Duckling Press, and many of you know that she is also an instructor of poetry at the Hudson Valley Writers Center, and you may have recently seen her on the poetry pop-ups curated by BK Fisher. So she is definitely around on social media, being published in journals. Please help me welcome Silvina López Medin.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you Hudson Valley Writers Center for hosting. I have found, following what Jennifer was saying, I have found a home in the Hudson Valley Writers Center during the pandemic. I moved to the Hudson Valley and I found them at least virtually for now, and it's been a pleasure to teach for them. I'm honored to be reading with both Jennifers, and thank you, the first one with Jennifer, for your beautiful poems. I have been eating, I loved it. So I'm gonna be reading some poems from my book, Poem That Never Ends, that just came out with Essay Press. And I'm gonna share my screen. Okay. The sound of blinds being pulled up is the first sound. It's in your hands, the weight of the slats all slightly bent to one side, as someone that bends with the ear towards the other, trying to hear more. What? Your grandmother, like your mother, could only hear 30% of all things. You cross out the word grandmother. You'll say your mother's mother. You'd rather have the word repeated, mother. Build the chain with no missing ring. You're not pulling yet, but it's in your hands, the chain that raises the metal slats. You hear what your mother's mother wouldn't hear, the slats clattering. She, who used to live between blades, her scissors silent to her, opening and closing on the cloth, cutting, until what? Until she reached an edge. A pair of eyes looking at her from the other side of the sewing table, her daughter, herself, a table, not flat, not smooth, the top filled with pieces of broken wood. Broken, can stick in your skin. A daughter, a table made of broken things, but varnished, protected, protective, like the blinds you're not yet pulling. To open and close, to cut until, to look up and see someone, not knowing what to do with the weight of a stir or the top of the table. Sharp points that don't hurt, but shine, varnished. To separate the cloth just cut into pieces. This is not your daughter, this is not you, and yet you are a mother. She is your mother's mother. You're pulling. Mm. 'Cause It rises from the scene, shoots out of it like an arrow, and pierces me, says Roland Barthes about a central element in photographs. He ends up calling it punctum, but I keep the first name he gives it. What is the wound, mother, in this photograph? A question I can think about, not ask. The image my mother captured with her phone, the photograph of the photograph, like a memory retold. Is that the wound? What's lost between the original print version and my mother's digital one? Some resolution, some precision. The original is on an upper shelf deep in a box whose lid my mother needs to lift. She needs to get a ladder first, lean it against the wall, stretch her long arms all the way back there, so she cannot reach again now, she says, the original. When I zoom it in on this digital version, it's hard to see any details. So dark the background, it gives no indication of place. And then it rises from the scene, shoots out of it like an arrow, and pierces me, the flash, bouncing off my father's glasses. That light signals what the photographer, my father's mother, was looking at. Her son's eyes, mother, flash, son, the glass that's always in between. Brooklyn, October 29, 2018. You will not look straight at the camera except when you are told to do so. You will forget. You will forget. You will forget that this is you. I think it can be done. You will also forget about the camera, but above all, you will forget that this is you. You. Yes, I think it's possible to achieve that from other perspectives. For instance, the perspective of motherhood, of your motherhood lost in a dominant, nameless motherhood. The opening of Marguerite Duras' film The Atlantic Man, I replaced the word death with motherhood. I am writing this in my head, my hands inside gloves that don't match. I lose at least one from the pair per season and hold on to the other. That single glove left behind still contains the lost one. That is to say, on the winter break, I read Pascal Quignard. In every image, there's a missing image, says he. I add, in every sound, there's a missing sound. Say, my mother, how she, because of her hearing impairment, is permanently reconstructing sentences from fragments. Isn't that writing? I am walking the 9 blocks back home from the subway. It is minus 18 degrees, and I'll never know how to turn that into Fahrenheit, or how at times I focus on something so much as to become something else. Gloves prevent us from breaking apart. Gloves are not relevant in Buenos Aires. This cold does not exist. The kind that makes you turn not only your head, but your whole body just to look at what's coming. I did not write much back there, just brought a couple of summer images, my mother and I at night standing in front of a white wall killing mosquitoes, my mother, my sons, I in the backyard hurrying to take away the clothes from the clothesline under light rain. Lighthouse. We were going up and the steps got narrower. Windows looked to a broader sea. Trees like ourselves clinging to the edges, and the red in some rooftops broke in the landscape what balance. All photos will turn out too dark or too bright. Smile. Once again, we were going up, hand in hand, steps got higher and higher, feet forced to adjust to stone and steady, and at last flight made of rope, each sole on a knot, up to door we pushed open, so much wind, I had to take off my earrings for them not to fly away. I had to pull down your woolen hat, as much as possible, son, as much as possible. I also tell myself. We walked on the metal structure, a floor of holes. We went in circles, leaning against the cement, against each other, wind, water, red tiles on miniature houses. Now we had to go down, and we wouldn't. Brooklyn, April 17, 2019. La Memoria de un Sonido is the name of an old literary magazine my friend lends me. The Memory of a Sound, first issue of the two it lasted. Just two, like a direct sound and its reflection, waves crashing against walls or a child running into a mother's hard lap. When you first realize that your parents are as abandoned as yourself, you are filled with terror. You start asking yourself, who's the caregiver here? Says Argentine filmmaker Lucrecia Martel in an interview in the magazine. Scene, exterior, day, veranda in Buenos Aires, February 2012. My mother and I sitting on a sofa, facing forward. She's talking about her eldest brother, who recently died in a car accident. Those years my mother left me with my aunts. He was the only one that visited me. She sobs. She's split in half. She's at her aunt's house with her brother. She's here on the veranda with me. I cannot hold the pieces. We are facing forward. I cannot turn around. The sofa fabric is plastic, rigid. I can feel its pattern marking the backs of our thighs. It was on February 21, 2012, almost 1 year since the birth of my eldest son. The phone rang. It was my mother's voice saying, Enrique is dead. A bus ran over him. He did not hear the horn. No introduction, no details, no real conclusion. A chain of facts, broken, pieces scattered. My uncle's hearing impairment was more severe than my mother's. It was hard for him to articulate most sounds. It was sometimes hard for us to understand, not him, but the words coming from him. Yet he insisted. He did not mind parting words, repeating, asking back. Words would become more material. We could almost touch them. In the interview, Martel goes on to speak about speech and time. When someone talks, they may use verbs in the present, past, or future tense. This temporal quality of words dissolves the idea of consecutive, chronological time. In this photo, there is a sepia layer of my mother and her brother in the 1950s, sitting close, though not holding each other. And then there is a red spot, the present tense of my mother's nail polish, her fingers holding her phone to take a photo of the photo, her fingers holding themselves. Who's the caregiver here? I must have thought sitting on the sofa on the veranda by my mother. I must have gotten lost in the thought, unable to act. I wrote a poem about it, a piece left out of some past book. I won't translate it from my native language, so you can at least read this, Mother. Siesta. Nos dábamos la espalda. Ese sonido ahogado, madre, ¿qué era? Por primera vez te escuchaba llorar. Me quedé quieta. Apreté la almohada contra la oreja. La almohada con el olor de tu pelo. No pregunté. No me di vuelta. Esperé que pasara, pero crecía tu llanto entre las dos. Hicimos lo que pudimos, quedarnos cada una en su lugar y en algún momento dormirnos. I'm going to read the last poem. Poem that never ends. Mama is in bed, eyes wide open. She doesn't turn on the light. Mama at midnight cleans the floor with a cloth over and over. Mama paints a picture that looks like another one. She breaks 3 brushes, not scared of splinters. Mama is a daughter, a diminutive one, in the backseat of a car. Her mother's taking her away from her. Mama at the door, staring at the red scarf on her mother's neck. Mama writes an entire page to the teacher. Words lean forward as if towards something they're trying to touch. Mama writes, Mama is a teacher. Mama places a pattern on a piece of cloth, cuts around it, cuts a circle on her skin. The scar is a spider. Mama spins her own cloth, scissors on the side. Mama turns bangs into a crooked hem. Mama teaches me how to draw, trees that bend, pretending movement. Mama, wound, breath, breeze. Mama demands stillness, carries on her neck the weight of a camera. Mama has lost the voices of birds. Mama, silence, so still, as if she's about to have her photo taken. Mama got lost under a table. She moves around the living room. Lights turn themselves on over her. Mama waits in the line that surrounds the dance school. Her father's body blocks the door. Mama draws her family on a paper. She's the tallest one, so tall her head goes out of the page. Mama draws all the family except herself. Mama paints a self-portrait. Everything is a self-portrait she gets tired of. Mama transports words to another tongue. Mama changes her own words. Mama bites her tongue so many times, so afraid to lose it. Mama is afraid to lose it all. Mama is a tongue. She splits herself in half because she wants to. Mama sits on top of someone else. She sways. She expands like a drop of ink on a piece of cloth. Mama closes her eyes, makes up a prayer to put herself to sleep. Mama is sinking. No one warns her of false darkness. Mama wakes up dead. Mama comes from a land surrounded by more land, camps on the lowest part of a boat, below waterline. She sees fish she doesn't see. Mama in the ocean with needles on her belly. Mama is a mother. Mama is a mother. Mama keeps the bit of a song she doesn't know. Mama hacks me and there is always between us a cushion or a stone. Mama in summer sleeps in a nightgown soaked in bathtub water. Mama wants to return to that summer. Mama wants to turn around. Mama on her belly on the sand, closed tight like an eyelid. Her face to the sun, to the sun, to the sun. Mama stays. She asks how much longer. Mama has lost another sound. She insists how much longer. Mama paints entire pages. Mama walks barefoot and steps on the body of a bee. Mama reads other people's mouths. Mama lights a fire and places us on top of it. She sings a song that escapes her. Mama lights a fire, places us around it in winter, paints our name with ashes. Mama lights up. Mama takes us by the hands. Let's go over hands. Mama asks our names. Mama sees everything, hears everything, remembers everything. Mama jumps across a paddle that's longer than her legs. Mama, from where to where? Mama, our shoelaces keep coming untied. We keep falling. Mama splits herself in half. She squeezes her mother's red scarf. Mama wakes up to feed us every night. Mama doesn't sleep anymore. Mama sleeps all the time. Mama is floating. Mama is sinking. Mama swims to no shore. Mama carries us on her back. Mama cannot see us. Mama sees everything. Mama squeezes a scarf, squeezes our hands. How much longer? Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was so beautiful, especially that last poem. I'm really glad that you read that one to us, and thank you for screen sharing. It was great to read along with your beautiful poems. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jennifer, and everyone.
Okay, great. Now we have Jennifer Militello. She is the award-winning author of The Pact, which just came out from Tupelo Press this year, and Knock Wood, winner of the Zank Nonfiction Prize, as well as 4 additional collections of poetry: A Camouflage of Specimens and Garments from Tupelo Press in 2016, called Positively Bewitching by Publishers Weekly; Body Thesaurus, also Tupelo, 2013, named one of the top books of 2013 by Best American Poetry; Flinch of Song, winner of the Tupelo Press First Book Award; and the chapbook Anchor Chain Open Sale. Her work has been published widely in American Poetry Review, The Nation, The New Republic, the Paris Review, Plowshares Poetry, and Tin House, and has been anthologized in Best American Poetry, Best New Poets, and Poem a Day, 365 poems for every occasion. She teaches in the MFA program in New England College. Please help me welcome Jennifer Militello.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for inviting me, and thank you to the Hudson Valley Writers Center for having me. It's really an honor to read with Jennifer and Silvina, and to be part of what has been a really incredible season. So, congratulations to all of you at the center for everyone. You've brought so many incredible writers. So thanks for having me. I am going to read from The Pact tonight. It is my new book, and it's a book that deals with complex love and obsession and family and all of the emotions that we experience as we sort of work to connect with other people, sometimes in ways that are successful and sometimes in ways that that create struggle, and a lot of times versions of that are a little bit of both. So I'm going to begin with a poem. I sort of always say that the title of this poem is kind of the thesis statement of the book. So this is: The punishment of one is the love song of another. At last I have found my assassin. At last I have struck gold. When my past hissed with cobras, you let me sleep. When I was falling, you brought the ground closer and made gravity of flowers like a kiss. One body moving is a seduction. One body is a practice leap and a parachute unsprung. Only the scalpel knows the passion of blood. We soothe it with cold and sing it to sleep. We leap at the chance to be blistered. We listen and stiffen, we pivot and reap. My rib cage could be a wasp nest built of paper. My hand could be the slip of sand across itself to slake the great unknown. Snow coughs along the windows now and listens differently to the pure. Snow brocades like cotton, prayers like burdens go. So, one of the things I think we always think about as we are writing poems and as we are beginning to sort of connect those poems into books is what kind of creates the sense of what that book might be doing, where the cohesion starts to come into place. And so I always talk about anchor poems, the poems that I write that seem to be poems that will stick around and that seem to be the poems that indicate what might be happening in the next book. And so one of the poems I think about for this particular book is a poem that was inspired by a statue, a 19th century wooden statue from the Congo that I stumbled on in the MFA, the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And this is the Nkisi Nkondi. And the Nkisi Nkondi was just this, I mean, when you see it, it is this wooden statue with these iron nails bristling out of its shoulders. So it has been hammered with nails. It has these scratched glass squares for eyes. It has this slightly open mouth. So it was a really striking figure for me. And when I started to look at what its function actually was, it was a power figure that was used to seal a vow or settle disputes between people. So it was filled with medicinal herbs and seeds in a hollow in its chest. And so it was both used to allow people to, again, connect with one another in a positive way, but it was also a figure of revenge when those connections or deals were broken. So it was like you came to this Nkisi Nkondi and you made this agreement, and then it would hunt you down if you didn't fulfill your end of the bargain. So it was actually described as a hunter healer of conflicts. So this is Nkisi Nkondi, and the epigraph reads, "This striking figure with its serenely rendered face and violently pierced body was made to contain and direct a spirit in order to assist people in need." And that's from the Art Institute of Chicago. "Hunter of murderers, of liars, of thieves, she loosens tongues, will not quench thirst. Pierce her shoulders to make it start, scratch her glass eyes blind as bone. Place inside her chambers potent herbs, earth from graves, a string or shell. Activate her to punish or afflict, estrange her and an ache will strike. If a dead deer lies by the side of the road, she is the weeks of decay before it's gone, grinning jawbone dragged by wolves. Rest your head in her lap to calm your nerves. Place your mouth to her breast to let the dead go. Sew her name into the lining of your coat. Close her eyelids with a gentle thumb. She exhales until the wind blasts shingles off a house. Scrape her with blades to seal her power. Slit her with knives to awaken a vow. Way to call a lover, way to cure the moon. She is carved from mortar and oxblood and wood. She is carved from water as it falls. Be destroyed by her image when telling a lie. Let each iron nail denote an oath. Her heart mummified jewel in the chest. Her fist is a lantern infested by dark. Her dowry is dust or blood on the lips. Read the entrails, swallow dirt, unbottle the cyanide gloom. The facets of this can be read like braille. Unmask your hands from the past kid gloves. So, as I mentioned, this is a book that deals with family relationships, and I was at a used bookstore in Henniker where I teach. They have this really amazing, huge used bookstore at the top of this hill. And I stumbled on this classical dictionary of the vulgar tongue. And it's basically a book of sort of obviously vulgar language, but there's also a whole bunch of insults in it. And I was really interested because as someone who comes from a family tough love, where oftentimes insults are used frequently, and sometimes they are meant literally, and sometimes they are meant as a form of affection. I thought it might be interesting to take this sense of the dictionary of the vulgar tongue and some of these insults, and just sort of explore that sense of tough love and how it works for those who are victims of it, though victims may not be the right word. So some of these insults come directly from that dictionary, and some of them are invented catalog of insults. So this is tough love in a vulgar tongue. She is baker-legged, a bad bargain, bacon-fed user of the back door. She squints like a bag of nails. She is an admiral of the narrow seas. She is adrift, a spoil sport, a mar all aground. She often goes against the grain. She is angling for farthings. She is full of emptiness, a fumbler, funky, a fussock. What a gill flirt, what a rum-dubber. Gimlet-eyed with thingamabobs. She squeaks in the gizzard. She steals goods for sale. She is humdrum, hubcapped, impure. She would no sooner hush the cull than murder the fellow. She's a hussy, a hizzy. She's got the blue devils, loafing as a couple of inkle weavers, like an owl in an ivy bush cesspool needing to be pumped. A girl with two black eyes, chattering like a magpie, pulling off her boots. Who could know what to do? She is jingle brains, a jackhammer, a Jason's fleece, is even left-handed, pug-nosed, pudding-sleeved, purse-proud, puzzle-text, pupil-monger, quail-pipe, quack-solver, queer cove, rabbit-catcher, ramsackle, rascal scouring the streets, more brawn than brains, timber-toe, tickle-pitcher, toe-row, nimble-tongued, unlicked cub, unrigged, untrussed, whining, whittler, whistlebelly, whippersnapper, wise acre, wolf in the stomach, word pecker, zigzag or zany, zad only a mother could love. So this is also a book that deals with romantic love, as the first poem indicates. And so there are groups of poems that sort of deal with the complexities of obsessive and romantic love. And this particular poem compares love to what happened at Jonestown. So Jonestown is really interesting because we think of it in a very particular way. It's always, you know, this group of people were in a cult and they all willingly drank the Kool-Aid, and we have that expression. But when you do some research about what happened at Jonestown, you realize that it's not that simple. So many of the people who died were children. Many of them were sort of unwilling to commit suicide and ended up being murdered. 909 people died. Jim Jones had them sign blank pieces of paper that he called compromises so that he could blackmail them with those signatures. And he also had what he called white nights, which were practice suicide episodes. So they drank the Kool-Aid many, many times. And obviously most of those times they didn't die. So by the time it actually came time for the real drinking of the Kool-Aid, people were really confused and sort of psychologically traumatized, and they weren't really sure what would happen. And there is one moment in this poem that is in the voice of Jim Jones, and is allegedly something that he said after one of these white nights. So this is If Our Love Were Jonestown. We would sign our compromises, not knowing what they say, and in this way pledged to stay, and in this way create a cult for two. We would give up all we want and are, emptied syringes surrounding buckets of drink. The unwilling in us would be injected with poison or shot. The promise of joy would lead us. There'd be a house at the head of the hive of houses telling us what we thought. Children would emerge from the jungle with jungle in their eyes, with their eyes wide and hands crusted with dirt. Children would disappear into the jungle, their lips stained. We would rest beneath the churned up soil, among the empty cigarette packs, among animal bones, an arrowhead, torn carpet, and damaged tile. Love would be 12 miles long and 7 miles wide, the size of something that could have been real and turned out to be a lie. Our white nights would be so white, none of us would get out alive. We'd endanger ourselves with what we believe, with how we follow. What we feel is our leader and the real paranoia. All the drills will have us thinking we'll live through it, but we won't in the end. Now I know I can trust you, my darlings. Go now, sleep tight. Tight is how we'll sleep, our breath in our chests, nothing let out. They'll come around with stethoscopes to be sure we are dead. If not, we are shot. But we are them. We kill the children inside us first, and this is why we die. We want to belong. We perfect believing. We perfect trust until it kills the children, until it kills us. So I think I will just read one more poem. This book, as I've said, is about love and the nature of love. And the first poem in the book begins with the question, what is love? And that refrain sort of repeats throughout the poem, throughout the book. And so this last poem is the second end cap to the book's frame. And I always think of it, I think of the way that when we use a repeated line in a poem, every time it's repeated, it is changed because of what happens in between. And so ideally returning to this idea of what love is by the end, after all of the poems that have come within the book, this sense of defining love has changed. And in this poem, love is an avocado seed, it's a nuclear testing site, and it's a stocked pond. So this is Ode to Love. Place its toothpicked pit in water, watch the grist of its insides grow, witness its populous bloom, honeycombed with rough. Its cobblestones grip the heart in their mitt, a closed fist thickened and gritty as silt, the swamp of the plum beet adamant as weeds, the dish of which is salted by complexities or cries. It is a house in which we cannot live, the quiver on an arrow we cannot launch. It grows late over Nevada as we watch, strikes its gullies, we grow burnt as a moth, mimics a sleep of archives and the small lies we forget, mimics all laughter broken by the time it leaves the mouth. With its moving parts, its chimes, its gleam, it muddies our archways lying low, gives off noise and steam. Its mechanics clear the fence. It must be wooed, must be quieted, hush. It must be soothed. Has a snag, has a bleed, a drape. Flaps awkwardly at its edges, a heron. At its center, a wide bottom, perfect with fish. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. That was wonderful. I wish that all the people who won't get vaccinated would read the poem about the Kool-Aid. Okay, we have some questions already in the chat. Garfield Charles, one of our board members, has a really interesting question here. It's for Jennifer. She alluded to the anchor poem for her book serving almost as the thesis for the book. He would like to know, what advice do you have for novice writers about selecting or creating that anchor thesis poem? And all of you could answer that if it relates to your work, or maybe you could change it to talk about your process. But we'll start with Jennifer.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. I think one of the things that I do when I am sort of between books, so I'm in that stage where I don't know what I'm headed toward or what things are going to look like, is really I just try and write as many poems as I can without putting pressure on myself to write about a particular subject or to write in a particular way. So I just try and kind of turn over poems as quickly as I can, and as intensely as I can. And by doing that, I think over time, you uncover whatever your next set of obsessions will be. So this was a book that I never planned to write. If I could go back in time, I maybe would have, like tried to thwart myself from writing it. But I think letting the sort of secret parts of your brain that know a little bit better than you do their work, and then you can look at what's there afterward and then say, oh, this looks like, as I've said, a poem that will stick around, or a poem that I feel happy with. And then once you have a few of those, you can then write toward a project, which is always a really great stage to get to.
Thank you so much for that wonderful answer. I have a follow-up question. In these Q&As, we often ask about craft, and the main question that we ask is about putting together a collection. Kind of, how do you know when you're writing individual poems versus when you're writing a collection? But the question that I want to ask right now is about the individual poem. How do you know when you are, what is it about the poem that makes you happy with the poem, or have a feeling that it is going to stick around and that it's not just a draft or an exercise?
So I guess I'll start again and just answer quickly, and then other people can answer. I think publication is always a really nice indicator, right? I mean, you're always sort of blindly sending work out into the world, and if something gets taken, that's kind of a good indicator. But also, I think if you can take time and become an objective reader for yourself, then eventually you start to be able to see that. But I do think it takes time. So one of my favorite poems I've ever written was a poem that I found like a year or two after I'd written it in a stack of things I had discarded. And immediately when I looked at it, I was like, oh my God, why did I get rid of this? So I think just hopefully eventually you're able to see it from a not you point of view because you've given yourself the time and the distance.
I think time is the most important thing. Every single one of my, not every single one, but many of them, it's like they're your new baby and you're totally in love with it. And then they turn into teenagers. They get real ugly and you don't like them anymore. And so it really is, like Jennifer said, if you put it away and then you come back and you still love it, I think that's a sign. I mean, you know, they're often never done, or sometimes you know instantly they're done. There's different, some poems are, you know, are done, and others you're fiddling with year after year, and they're not right. They're still not perfect.
Yeah, I'm trying to think while I'll listen to your answers, because I think it's a very hard, I mean, it's hard to realize sometimes. And I was thinking that to add one more thing, I agree with both Jennifers about the importance of time, but also I just want to add that I have a couple persons I trust a lot, like that are my first readers, and it's really important to see what happens to them when they read my work. And sometimes even if I read aloud in front of them, to see what happens with the energy, which is sometimes what happens when you try a text in theater. It's like what you can feel in the air if there's a tension or what's going on there. But yeah, it's a lot of time and work, basically.
I've been trying a new thing where it just I do audio versions. I read the poem and then I listen to it back, and you hear a lot of things that you don't see on the page, I think, too. But yes, having readers that you trust is extremely important.
That's a great bit of advice too, the reading the poem, recording it, and then listening to it back, or even reading it to yourself, in the mirror. You hear a lot of things that you don't necessarily see when it's on the page. So along those lines, about putting together a full-length collection, you've all done more than one collection, chapbooks for Jennifer, and then a full length, and Jennifer and Silvina have several collections. So what advice would you give to our students who are in the audience tonight, who are putting together their first collection to send out to presses? They've had several poems published, they have a nice acknowledgements page, but they have not yet gotten a book accepted.
Well, I try to, I really enjoy that moment of putting together. And also I much enjoy seeing it, how other people does it. It's not only as an editor, right? So one of the things I do is I try to identify the threads in the manuscript and see what I do with those threads. If I want to, there's a zone of certain threads that might have like a subtitle for that. I can't find the words in English now, sorry. For that section of the book, if it will have one or more sections, the book. And then I also look at it as a record, a music record. So I try to think of atmospheres, what is the opening of the book, which is very important both for me as an author or for me as an editor, because it's the first thing we see as editors in submissions, right? So the opening is, of course, hugely important. The first two poems, I would say, and then which is the arc. So the opening and what happens with the atmosphere as in a record. So here this is happening. It's more like cheerful or whatever. And then there comes slow motion, and then what it moves toward and how it ends. And of course, the ending is what keeps resonating. Yeah.
So I was just at New England College for our MFA residency, and I taught a workshop on ordering the full-length manuscript, and I think a lot of what was just said really applies. I mean, a couple of the things that I talked about were treating, so obviously beginning and ending are huge. We all sort of know that. But also for me, treating each section like it's an individual book. So having a very strong beginning to a section, having a very strong ending to a section, and then an arc within that section. Also thinking about the principle of variety. So moving your reader through and trying to put different types of poems formally or in voice or in perspective back to back. And then also, of course, just thinking about those threads and how they work. It's interesting because Jericho Brown was there and he actually talked about the fact that he links the last line of each poem to the title of the next poem. So I thought that was a really interesting linkage piece as well. But the other thing I would say is don't be afraid to sacrifice poems that are weaker to strengthen the manuscript as a whole. So if you have a couple of things that you're not sure about, it's better to have a shorter manuscript than to have some weak moments. And also, sometimes you think you're working on a second book, but sometimes you need to cannibalize that second book, some of the best poems from the beginning of what you think is a second manuscript in order to strengthen an initial manuscript.
I agree with so much of what both of you said. And I would just add, it was important for me to share it again, the manuscript with trusted readers and do that 5 strongest, 5 weakest, and the manuscripts get smaller and smaller. It's always interesting to see the overlap between, you know, sometimes there's advice, you know, front load your best poems. If you're sending things to contests and stuff, so, you know, front load your best poems. But then sometimes that raises the questions if you send the book to 3 different people, they might come up with, if you ask them to identify the 5 strongest poems, they might come up with different ones. But oftentimes there's overlap and between worst and best poems, and you can kind of build and then what feels right to you if you agree with what people are finding to be the strongest poems. But I really like Jennifer's, that always seems absolutely true to me too, that you want to make every section first and last and arc. And you know, sometimes I think I've tried that Jericho Brown, not Jericho, but I don't, was it Jericho Brown who said it, that the last line and leading into the title, sometimes that works. And then sometimes you go, oh, that's a little too obvious and clumsy and you have to, you know, but it's like, that's something I've tried too, that you, and the same thing with the variety of the forms and the kind of poems are rubbing up against each other. And again, sometimes it works to have different styles, and then other times that feels too clumsy and you want to have things that are a little bit more, I guess the poems kind of demand order, and sometimes anyway, that's to add to what Silvina and Jennifer said. That's things that have been useful to me.
Thank you so much. We just got another question in the chat, and this one is for Silvina. The question is, can you talk about poetry as translation and the experience of translating poetry?
Thank you. Well, I think we would all agree that in the end, everything is translation, right? So when we are writing poetry, we are translating experiences, somehow translating experiences or whatever we want, not necessarily experiences, of course, but whatever we want to talk about, we are somehow translating that into a certain form. So we are basically translating all the time. And well, in my case, also between languages. I move between languages. And in fact, this is the first book that I've written in English, almost fully. My native language is Spanish. And so what can I say? Translating for me is about, first of all, reading a very attentive and detailed reading. And that's that's what I do in the different things I do as an editor, as a translator, as a writer, or when I do an interview or whatever. So the first thing is like an attentive reading or an attentive look at what I want to write about. And then I have to, in this book, for instance, self-translate into English. I'm thinking aloud because it wasn't a very special experience and different from other books. In this particular case, it was for me important to have it in English in many ways, but in one aspect was that I'm talking about my mother, so the language created a distance that helped me writing this book more freely about this particular subject. I don't know if that answers the question. It's a bit, I could talk a lot, but I don't want to, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we have another question in the chat. I think that, yes, about a question about persona, because both Jennifers had some persona poems that they read this evening, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on persona. It sometimes seems to be cyclical in terms of what editors think about persona and then the questions of appropriation. So it's something that we talk a lot about in our workshops at the center. So maybe if you could just talk a little bit about your thoughts on persona and what attracted you to using that form for some of your work in these books.
Well, I guess I'll start since I directly used the word persona poems, and I feel uncomfortable too. For many years, I only wrote my first persona poems a few years ago. I often have not liked them because of that worry about trying to speak across time. In my poems in particular, there's an issue of speaking for people who lived in a very different time and society, and putting words into their mouths that would not be appropriate. At the same time, I felt a great countervailing urge in this case, the poems that I'm writing, because women are so neglected in the historical record. And when you go through the graveyards, and there are so many amazing stories that it felt important to give some kind of life to the story of women in early colonial America. There are difficulties. I have it's part of a longer manuscript, and I have issues with, there are some voices I'm not planning on trying to speak for. So I think it's complicated, but I think it can be very rich when you really try to get inside someone's experience. I think it becomes much more powerful. I've written poems that I literally wrote, I wrote about the person I ultimately ended up writing a persona poem. And there's such a difference with the power when you can get it right. But I think you do have to be careful.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think you do have to be careful, but I do also think there's a lot of value to it when it's done delicately and carefully. In fact, my poem, my book just before this, A Camouflage of Specimens and Garments, is completely set up as the voice of like a sickly speaker who is writing these letters in prose poems form. And then between them is adopting all these other voices as a form of camouflage and exploration of her emotional state. And a lot of those are mythological voices or fictional voices. And I think certainly all of them are fictionalized, right? So I think the important thing to remember, especially like this was a really meta book because it was a speaker who was almost writing persona pieces. But I think the thing to remember is that the emotional parallels are the important piece, that you are holding up the image of someone else in order to reflect a sort of larger emotional reality. And ideally, if you are aware of the very glaring situations where you simply cannot tread because you're dealing with a particular form of oppression, or you are sort of obviously taking on something that you have no right to. I think if you can work in that sort of murky, fictionalized emotional realm, hopefully you can do it in a way that is valuable and is not sort of, appropriating someone else's experience in damaging ways.
Do you have anything to add to that, Silvina?
I have to say I never wrote a personal poem, so I'd rather
You're staying silent on that.
More experience with that. Yeah.
Great. Sophia's going to ask another craft question, and that will be our last question for the night. And before she starts, I just want to thank you all again for being here, for your incredible readings, and to the wonderful audience. We have such a wonderful, attentive, engaged audience at all of our readings, and we hope to see you back for the last 3 readings of the summer session.
So tonight we've talked a lot about the importance of exploring your secret obsessions and developing your own poetic intuition, taking time and distance from your work. But I think there also has to be a counter side to that, where as a practicing artist, you have to discipline yourself. So how do you balance that? What are the rules and the structure that you give yourself?
I think it's interesting to think about, giving, I don't really consider giving myself time away from the poems as cutting myself any slack. I mean, in fact, I do not cut myself any slack. So, whether or not I am completely as sort of disciplined as I used to be, because life, really interferes more and more as you take on more responsibilities. But I think your sense of talking about this in partnership with obsession is really important, because obviously reading poetry, writing poetry is pretty obsessive in and of itself. So I guess when I think about my own discipline, in some ways it is making myself sit down to work, obviously, but it's also seeking out the work that I will be inspired by. So I think as a reader, forcing myself always to find new work by other people that will keep that flame going in me is a form of discipline. And then also I think it's a form of discipline to understand when I am not at a place where I am working productively in one way, like generating new work, So going back to work that I have done, that I have left behind, and sort of moving through it. So like right now, for example, I'm going through a whole pile of just notebooks that have stuff in them, and I have no idea what's in them because I was in a place where I was not producing new work. So I think there are varying forms of discipline, but I think ideally, you know, Agnes Martin in her writings book talks about the fact that we all sort of hate ourselves on some level, right? We're all sort of perpetually punishing ourselves. So I feel like there's a balance there, but I think a lot of us are not giving ourselves a break ever. So I don't know if that answers your question, kind of touches on it in a lot of different ways. So.
Thank you, Jennifer, because I feel very identified with many things you have said, and especially that I don't know how you said it, but yeah, we are sometimes so hard with ourselves, right? So I think I really appreciate what Jennifer said, and I think it's really important to recognize that there are times when we are being generative, and there are times, or at least that happens to me a lot, when I'm not being generative, or however where you put the accent. So I have to remind myself to sort of pardon myself, because I feel so guilty. But I realize, and this is only because of time, as time passed, I realized that there are phases when I'm not generative. And I have a friend who's also a great poet, Tara James, and I always remember that she said, even when I'm not writing, I'm writing. And I also have another friend who says there are generative phases and there are accumulating phases. So during those accumulating phases, that's not a good translation, but anyway, you know what I mean. You have to be able to wait, and then when you are generative, you have to work. So basically I have times when I'm working a lot on a certain project, and there are times when I'm doing other stuff that surrounds that is poetry, but it's not my own writing, for instance, and I have to be able to wait for that. But what I do, and it's for me very important, to keep a notebook. So even when I'm not being like generative in an explicit way, I'm taking notes, and then that's raw material. And when I have nothing, I don't like to confront the blank page. So when I don't have anything, I go back to my notebook. I don't go to the blank page.
Yeah, I think both Silvina and Jennifer have summarized some of what I do as part of my discipline, that there's the filling the well time, the time when the well is filling and you're reading. You might be just taking notes on things you've observed during the day. But I've also added, I used to just wait for inspiration. I really don't do that anymore. And I have found it more and more effective to do poem a day exercises. There's something about that often frees you up. I might do it at 9 o'clock at night. I'm tired. I'm like, oh, you're exchanging with a few writers and you have to produce something. And somehow that frees you up from that white space on the page. You just have to write anything down, and most of it is garbage, but surprisingly often there's something that's really wonderful that comes out of it. Surprising, unexpected. You don't realize what was simmering away in some part of your brain, and you're allowed to write about anything. It can just be stupid. It can be seem very pedestrian when you get started, and then it may veer off in another direction. So I've actually found that to be, and you don't have to put a lot of time into it. It can be 15 minutes, half an hour at the end of the day.
Thank you all so much, and thank you for the questions. We hope to see you back here on August 11th when we have another poetry reading. So thank you very much. Sophia will send you the link to this recording in case you came late and you missed any of it. You can hear the whole recording on our YouTube channel starting tomorrow.